Welcome to week two. I hope you're doing well. I hope you are enjoying the weather. Depending on whatever state you're in, I know that it can be fairly different here in Texas, North Texas. It is actually pretty chilly. I think when we went out to church, I think it was like in the 20s, which is cold here. I think it's now up to the 40s, so it's still considered cold. I know that we adapt, but living in the panhandle of Texas and then going to school in Oklahoma where you'd have ice storms, now spending, let's see, since 2004 when I got up here to North Texas, each and every year I become more adaptive to the warm weather. And so these 20 and 40 degree weather days are a little bit more difficult. So, anywho, I hope that you are enjoying this class. I know that we've are just in week two. We've got a long way to go, but we're going to learn a lot. I think that this is one of those classes, just as all classes are. But when we think about counseling skills, what are the foundational things that we need to learn, that we need to assimilate to, so that therefore, when we're sitting across from somebody, we are doing the very things that we know can impact the individual sitting across from us very positively. I know that these are things that I learned in ministry, sitting across from individuals. You know, the things that, don't spin around in your chair, don't pop your pen, don't constantly look at the clock, all these different variances, but yet people time and time again would do them. I know that in the church, and even now, I have the opportunity of getting to train up counselors, which is fun because it gives me an opportunity to examine myself. What are the things that maybe I've regressed back into just because of the idea of being aware of them, but not being aware that I'm actually doing them? So, again, this is something that we all need to get stronger in, not just those of us who are starting out in the field, for all of us, because, again, for those of us, we have the opportunity to regress. This week we're looking at chapters 3 and 4. I'm actually going to lecture from chapter 3, so you have the opportunity of walking through that as you look at this lecture, listen to this lecture, and then you'll have the opportunity of doing chapter 4 on your own. And there will be no discussion board this week. Typically what we'd like to do is on the weeks that there's not any additional assignments, then those are going to be the weeks that you have a discussion board. If there are things, if you've gone into Blackboard and you've looked at the grading sheet, and there are things in that grading sheet that are not on the syllabus, please disregard those things. One of the things that TKU does, and they do this amazingly, is they'll take a syllabus and grading sheet from the semester beforehand and place it in the next time that class is being taught. And if it's taught by the same professor, then it's ready to roll, depending on the new content that the professor is teaching. But if it's taught by a new professor, some of the assignments may look differently. The content, of course, is going to be differently because of how it's expressed and what have you. But I did have a question about that earlier this week, and so if you did look at the syllabus and noticed that it had shifted or changed, it's not that I'm trying to trick anybody. Of course, that's not what I'm not trying to trick anybody. But if you did look at the grading score on grades and you're seeing some things that don't reflect the syllabus, please disregard those things. I have not gone in there to delete those things yet, but I promise you, if it's not on the syllabus, then it is not something I'm going to be asking you to do. This week, though, I am asking you to do your first assignment. Last week we had a Blackboard discussion. This week we're going to actually do an assignment. This is one that I'm looking to make sure it's the right one. Yes, this one might be one of the most uncomfortable exercises that you may be asked to do at King's. And as you hear that, please don't allow anxiety to start trying to come into you. Why? Because the idea is this. This is something I actually utilize time and time again, and I think the opportunity is that if you get this down now, you'll be able to see the beauty of this assignment, so you can actually utilize it for the people that you're interacting with. And so Matthew 6 refers to the eyes, eyes being to the windows of the soul. And when we see Jesus constantly, we see the opportunity of ministry always reflecting out of who he was as he was connected to the Father. Of course, we all understand that. But one of the interesting facts was the idea of what attracted people to Jesus, from the standpoint of people thinking, I've got to get to him, like the woman that had the blood disorder for 12 years. her belief orientation shifted and changed, and as a result of that, she knew that she had to get to Jesus to touch the hem of his garment, which is truth. And so in that, what was that? And I believe ministry, just my own personal opinion, actually broke out from the extent of when people would actually connect with Jesus, and be able to get to see him. They would see, Jesus would see them, and as a result of that, ministry would already be in place. Why? Because he would be able to get to see what was in them, and they knew that they were being seen, which is vital. Just as we think about counseling skills and how looking at someone, okay, but seeing them, is there a difference in that? I personally believe yes, but what is it that you believe? What you'll find within this class is the idea of the very questions you may ask. Brady, is this question accurate? Is my response to this question, I guess would be a better way of saying, is this right? And my response to you was, what is right? I had one of the questions within Blackboard, which was, hey, if this isn't the right response to this question, please correct me. And my response back to the student was the idea of, hey, my job in this process is to help you create some type of resolution or moving closer to that resolution. Why? Because you're going to be sitting across from these individuals. And it's not about you trying to be indoctrinated by me. And of course, that's not my heart to indoctrinate you. But the idea of helping you get to a place of what is it that I believe and why. And then not only that, but how do I express it in a way that's going to impact the person sitting across from me? Again, the what is it that I believe? Why do I believe that? And then how do I express it in a way that's going to impact those individuals? Because it's, again, it's great. It's great that we know the content. It's great that we know the material. It's great that we know the research. But if we struggle to express that, then as a result of that, what benefit is it knowing these things? And so in this is a reason why the application of what it is that we're doing as we continue to talk about these things, we want assignments and examples, not examples, assignments. There we go. Okay, lost my track of thought of what the word I was looking for. But again, the exercises so that we can actually see. That's what it was. I was looking for exercises, not examples. And just as anything, if we're not willing to do it and be a forerunner first, then how is it that we can actually expect individuals that we're leading to want to sit and submit to it? So here's the assignment in the long prelude is Matthew 6 refers to the eyes being the windows of the soul. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to get with a classmate. And what I want you to do is I want you to turn on 60 seconds on your clock, on your phone, whatever it is. And I want you to sit in front of them and without saying a word, look at them eyeball to eyeball for 60 seconds. And then what I want you to do is I want you to, once your alarm rings, I want you to report, what did you feel? What did you sense? Was that awkward? Was it not awkward? What is it that you could observe about the individual? Was it difficult observing the other individual because our eyes were too busy on the idea of being seen? And I just want you to jot down the dynamics of what that experience was like. It probably is going to, one of the stipulation is let's pair up with gender. So again, the females to females and males to males. And so as a result of that, or somebody that you're connected with, a sister, a brother, mom, dad, whomever it is that you're connected with, you have the opportunity of doing this assignment with. Again, same gender, just for the sake of just for some stipulations. And then after you've had an opportunity to do that for 60 seconds and recording what took place, here's what I'm going to ask you to do it again. I want you to do it again. I want you to do it again. And the second time, I want you to jot down some thoughts after you've had an opportunity of the alarm going off. And I want you to jot down some thoughts. And then I want you to compare and contrast the first time that you did it with the second time that you did it. Because we can miss things for the sake of trying to push the session in a direction. And people are coming in needing validation. And that is crucial, and we see Jesus doing this all throughout his ministry. He validated people. He validated them by seeing them, not just looking at them, but seeing them. We see this within, and those of y'all that have had me in other classes, you know that I use this illustration multiple times because I think it actually creates the foundation that we need, is just as John and Peter were walking into the temple, and the individual that was carried there was begging for riches and gold. What does he say? What I do not have, I don't give you, but what I do have, I do give you. But what I want us to move back to is the idea of look at me, right? The idea he needed to see him. So in this, I'm interested to get to see and read your responses as a result of that, okay? And then, of course, follow the stipulations. I want you to record this. I want you to write a 2-page paper on your experiences, and I look forward to getting to read that. To kind of give you a little bit of mine, I'm trying to think if I did this within the first class and first week. I know that I usually communicate some things that are redundant in classes, and I'm just trying to make sure that I haven't already done that within week 1. But this was something that we did through a pastoral orientation of the church that I used to be a part of, a church that I used to minister at, and I served on staff there for 8 years, and we actually attended there for 15 years, and it was fantastic. This is something that I actually do within marriage counseling almost 100% of the time. Why? Because sometimes I'll actually forget. It's not because I don't feel like that there's a benefit. I want them to connect. I want them to connect. If people connect by seeing each other first, that is that nonverbal communication that a lot of us talked about within the first week's discussion board, right? The idea of being able to sense, to see, to hear what nonverbals are being communicated. And so as a result, I know a lot of what I do is marriage counseling. I want to help them get back to that place of what was it like the very first time you saw each other. And this exercise is vital. It helps out significantly. And so in that, let's be aware of how we see each other. Let's be aware of how we're being seen. And then let's communicate and talk about, through this assignment, what that was like for you, okay? Want a title page. I'll talk a little bit more about the stipulations of that within the assignment part of how that assignment needs to be submitted. So be looking for that. Chapter 3, here we go, developing the relationship. Extremely crucial, just as anything, when people come into your room, what is it that you want them, how do you want them to feel? What do you want them to see? What do you want them to experience? And how do we put them at ease? Do you have kind of an elevator speech, if you will, about the dynamics of counseling that allows them to be able to understand the contextual nature of what has brought them in? Because they may be only aware of the pain or hurt that they're experiencing, but sometimes we get into this place of being vulnerable, and so we'll reach out for help, but then the moment that we're actually there, we're sitting there thinking, why am I here? I shouldn't have done this. And so being able to communicate some type of context can help them out significantly. So I know that we talked a little bit about that within the first weeks of the lecture. So figure out what that looks like. I know the elevator speech may seem like it's making it insensitive, and that's not my heart in that. But what is counseling? What would it look like for you to have, a 2 to 3 to 5 minute validational statement that actually allows people to, when they come in there, they're like, oh, that's right. That's why I came into counseling. Okay? So the importance of relationships matter. And so some of the dynamics of what's in us impacts other people. So much about week 1's discussion board was the dynamic of the nonverbals. I read multiple students' response about the nonverbals, and it was exciting and encouraging to get to see how all of you that wrote on that can anticipate, can see, can hear. One of the dynamics within counseling is the dynamic of the body and the validation. When a body, of course, we know that we're made 3 in 1. The idea is, the body, the container, the soul, the mind, the will, emotions. Those kind of get the 3 main. Of course, there's more about the dynamics of the invisible giving shape to the physical, whether we look at that theologically and or from a quantum physics orientation. But the dynamic of the spiritual, of course, we understand that. Of course, being at TKU and the foundation of the spiritual and who God is. So the body is a container that fills. If I was taking a picture and accidentally missed the nail and hit my thumb, we validate that by going and getting a Band-Aid. But when the body feels emotionally, do we validate those very things? And so much of the dynamic of what people are looking for is external validation. One of the things that we do within marriages is help them understand internal before external, right? Internal before external. And so when they feel they need the mind to actually validate what the body's communicating, it actually gives verbiage to that so that the mind and body are in unison, so that we can actually invite God into whatever that is, so that all three parts are integrated, if I can say it like that, so that we're able to move forward. The problem is that so much of the time people actually repress whatever it is that they're feeling. They invalidate that because of the lack of understanding the part that the mind actually plays with the body. And because of that, that represses all that energy, all those feelings into the every cellular makeup of who we are. So in that, the very dynamics of wherever they go, they are not only taking this with them, but they're also broadcasting it out of them. What's in us will permeate through us. And out of that, the dynamic is understanding that everything within us from a biological nature is gravitating towards love. And also from the standpoint of everything with a biological cellular standpoint is dissipating away from fear. So the dynamics of how we are processing things within ourselves as God makes us aware so that we can allow beauty for ashes, that transaction, so that God can heal us as we continue to process and express that, the very dynamics of within us is being communicated through us. So what is it that we're communicating to the people sitting across from us from the standpoint of what dwells within us? This is why it's so important for us to be self-aware, for us to make sure that we're walking through a similar process that we're asking the individual that's sitting across from us walking through. And this is why we, as counselors and as ministers, are advocates for the very field that we are skilled in. We want counselors to go through counseling. We want pastors to go through ministry, or vice versa. Counselors to go through ministry. We want pastors to come through counseling, right? And so in that, not only if that's something that is taking place not only within us and through us, that's taking place within them as well. So the dynamic of how we develop a relationship of as they come into the room, we may get a sense of what's in them and how that can impact us. Well, how do we experience, how do we process, how do we engage that if we feel like that there is a dissipating dynamic within us that's moving away from the very client, when we know that some of the aspects is to continue to move forward, to lean forward, to show interest, to show connection, to continue to build that relationship. And so in this, one of the things that I'm going to ask you to come to a resolve in, or at least moving closer to that, is what do you do as a result of processing the things that you have experienced, that you are currently experiencing, and or that you will experience. Because again, if we don't process them, then our bodies actually become the beneficiary of that. And as a result of that, it not only impacts us, but it impacts everywhere we go. Everywhere we go. Every time somebody comes into our room, we can look at this illustration of the carpet's white, the couch is white. They're coming in and wearing all white, and we're having the opportunity of coming into the room carrying a 5-gallon bucket of red paint. And as a result of that the lid of the container is off. We hold it up about shoulder width, and we drop it right in the middle of the carpet. What does the red paint get on? Everything. The better question is, if we're the ones dropping the red paint, what does that red paint represent? And as a result of the very things that we're wanting to make sure that we give the client, it's so important to make sure that we have those things in us. Just again, as Peter told the individual, silver and gold I do not have, but what I do have, I give you. So through this process of your academic education, and as you continue to journey to what God has for you, what is in you matters. God has created such a beautiful process that when we experience something, if we're not aware that we're pushing it down and or repressing, that guess what? The kindness of the body through God is actually eventually in times bringing it back to the conscious surface, so that guess what? We can actually utilize our will to say, oh, you're right, and process that. But so much of the time we see that it kind of overwhelms us and we push it right back down. And it becomes the proverbial adult version of Jack in the Box or yo-yo or whatever you want to term that. So the dynamics of the importance of our relationship matters, and it especially matters when we look at the idea of what's in us. But not only that, but what's in them. And again, part of that is the idea of us walking alongside them. But how do we help them get things out? And as a result of that, being aware of the process so that they don't continue to push things back down. When we think about the idea of repentance and or metanoia, changing our thoughts, what does that look like to make sure that they're doing that in a way that it's not just substitution? They're not just changing a thought for another thought, but the dynamic of inviting God into that thought so that transaction can happen, so that healing can happen. So again, all these things are crucial and important when we think about skills that are developing the relationship. Building a rapport, building a connection. These are things that are crucial, especially if you're going to be working with minors. Within adults, people may come in and they're sitting there thinking, time is money, let's jump in the deep end. And you know what? You'll have a lot of individuals, and a lot of the individuals that I work with that are adults, that's kind of how they are. Now with children, there's usually an extended motivation called mom, dad, or caregiver that's usually driving them towards that session. And so in that, how do we create some internal motivation that they want to actually be there, that they actually want to come back? So the opportunity of creating a safe place, connecting with them through a rapport, playing a game, doing these type of things, inviting or creating a place where they would invite us into their atmosphere by asking them questions, by asking them things that they like, and trying to create an opportunity that I have something in connection with them. I like skateboarding. Oh, you know what? I skateboard all the time, and well, here's the thing. There's a lot of times that whatever they're into, and this can even take place as adults. We want to meet people where they are, just as Paul did to the Athenians, right? He met them where they were and looked for an opportunity to be able to minister and or counsel. And as a result of that, that's so important for us, is to allow people to come into our space, right? The office. And then as a result of that, build a safe atmosphere where they'll invite us into their space, so that they can actually share and be transparent and vulnerable, so that we know the context of what's taking place, so that we can journey along with them, right? So in that, the idea is, okay, well, maybe I don't know anything about skateboarding, and that's fine. A lot of times, I would say the vast majority of sessions, I've got something in common with them. But whether it's music, whether it's movies, whether it's sports, whether it's whatever it may be. But in the times that I do not, then those are the times where I'll say, you know what, I don't know anything about that. Can you teach me a little bit about skateboarding? Or can you teach me a little bit about whatever that may be? And as a result of that, I am asking, hey, invite me into your space, so that, guess what, we have some type of connection, so that they actually see me as being there for them, and that I'm not just here just trying to get them to act better, because guess what, mom and dad have sent me here, and I'm supposed to convey the message that mom and dad have been trying to convey. Okay, so in that, developing skills for developing the relationship, building rapport is vital. And as a result of that, not having a one-size-fits-all. Okay, so everybody that's an adult, they want to come in and jump in the deep end. So we're just going to meet them right there. So we don't even assess if they are that type of person or personality. Because if they want to build a rapport, but yet I've already kind of made a blanket statement that everybody that's adult, we're going to jump in the deep end, and we're not going to kind of ask some questions and build a process and a rapport or whatnot, that may cause them some friction. That may cause them some anxiety. So as a result of that, how do we assess these things so that as people come in, we are not causing anxiety from the get-go, because we're not meeting people where they are? It's crucial in developing the relationship. As we look at chapter 3 and some of the dynamics and the importance of relationships, we look at Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers did a lot of great things. He talked about genuineness, which is huge, unconditional positive regard, concreteness, and respect. These are things that are vital when we are wanting to impact people. Whether that's from a ministerial standpoint, whether that's from a counseling orientation, we want to convey these things. Now, he does get criticized because of his indirectness. And some people would say, Brady, there's not enough direct. The dynamics of constantly saying, or helping them kind of continue getting to the place where they actually come up with their own resolve. And of course, we want to do that. But how directive do we want to do that? And again, you get to have the opportunity of coming to that resolution. Are you a Rogerian? Do you feel like the way that Rogers is depicted upon chapter 3 and what you know about him from previous classes, or you will get to learn about him, is that you? And again, if you hear other people, well, guess what? It's not directed enough and it's not going to be beneficial enough. Well, again, if you feel like it is, then does it matter what other people believe? Because right next to my office is a play therapist, and not just somebody that just meets with kids, but someone that actually has gone through the training and certification process of not only becoming a counselor, but also to specialize in this very technique. I've had opportunities of working with play therapy and actually getting to sit under a play therapist early on in my professional career when I was going through a practicum coming out of graduate school. And I remember looking at play therapy and I wanted to pull my hair out. But as a result of that, I would see the beauty and the benefit of it. And I'm sitting there thinking, boy, I am so grateful for play therapists. Play therapists have a part and a role in helping kids and helping children. But also understanding who I am and what I feel like my personality is and the way God has grafted me into the kingdom so that the opportunity of me being able to express who I am, that's not me. So which one's right? Yes. Why? Because for the play therapist, the office is right next to me. She has come to the resolve, this is who she is, and this is the very part that she needs to play, and unpacking that. Awesome. And as a result of that, I have as well, but it's different. But do we continue to utilize genuineness as a result of whatever population that we meet with? Yes, hopefully. Unconditional positive regard? Yes. Concreteness? Yes. Respect? Yes. So one of the things that you may find yourself as you take theories, or because you may be a pastoral student, you may not have to take theories. I'm not sure what the degree programs are for non-biblical counseling students, but the dynamic is this. When you see so many different theories, we may look at the theory concretely, from an all-inclusivity standpoint, and you say, yes, 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 no, 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 yes, okay. So as a result of that, I'm not Rogerian, but boy, I do like a lot of these dynamics of what they offer. Adlerian, the dynamic of not actually, before all those that went before him, not sitting behind a couch and sitting there processing, him getting out in front and doing the very individualistic, the way that we understand counseling for it to be, and or ministry. Being in front of the person so they can actually see you, whereas Freud would sit behind them as they were sprawled out on the couch. So as a result of that, they would be laying on a couch and Freud would be behind them listening. Whereas Adler came around to the other table. Okay, if Freudian, that type of works for you, okay, great. But the dynamic of Adler, again, what do you feel God is calling in you? And I think that so much of the time is that we feel like we're being indoctrinated to the extent of this is how I need to do it. Well, is there anything scripturally that's speaking out to how you're expressing it? That always should be a question. Am I causing the person that's sitting across from me, am I causing them pain? Am I causing them friction? Am I causing them anxiety? Then as a result of that, how do you feel like God's calling you to express what it is that you are learning in these classes? Maybe God is stirring something within you that as a result of that, there hasn't been any foundation to yet. So as you hear Rogers talk about these things, you may sit there and say, well, those all are 4 great things. So therefore, do I have to do it like that? No. No. And if I don't become a Rogerian therapist or minister to the extent, does that mean I can't utilize these things? No. You can take and make a very eclectic expression of what you're learning in this class, and really what you get down, if you were able to come in to see my kind of expression, it looks like all of them kind of collectively assimilated into one, unpacked. I love using the miracle question. I love using the individualistic psychology of being in front of people. I like a lot of the different dynamics. Do I fall in one category? No. Do you have to? No. As we continue to journey in chapter 3, empathy. Empathy, you're going to hear a lot about. The foundation to therapeutic relationship is the dynamic of in their shoes, intellectually and emotionally. Can you put yourself in their shoes? Okay. Can you understand what they're going through? Because if we can't, it makes it extremely difficult to contextually understand why they would be. So you got picked in last in dodgeball, and mentally I'm thinking, so what's the big deal? A lot of kids have it worse than this. So why are we having a problem with this? If I can't put myself in their shoes and hear it from the impact that that's causing me, then as a result of that, I can actually impact them greater. And as a result of that, nobody wins, especially the individual that came in. So we're going to hear the dynamics of sympathy and empathy and compassion. What are the correlations? And then how are the areas discorrelatable? And so the dynamic of this is this. The dynamic of this is this. Okay. I said that and it, yeah, funny in my head. Okay. So there are things called sympathetic vibrations. For all our musicians out there, you're aware of this. And I am not a musician. A lot of times if you ever see me in church, you won't see me clapping and singing at the same time. Why? Because I throw myself off. And so that's not an area that I would call a gifting or even an application. So usually my hands are in my pocket when I'm doing praise and worship, or they're kind of extended up. Okay. Anyway, but the idea, if I have guitar A and guitar B, and as a result of that, they're somewhat in the same vicinity, and as a result of that, they are tuned to the same chord, and I strum guitar A and walk away, what will happen is a guitar B, if one of the chords is attuned, then guess what? That string will start vibrating. It's called a sympathetic vibration. And how it impacts us within counseling is the idea of what the person is coming in with can impact us as a result of that, where we can lose objectivity. And now again, am I saying to the extent that when people come in that we have to be so cold that we're concerned that that it might impact us, so that therefore we can actually be a benefit to them? No, what I'm saying is be real, be vulnerable, be transparent, but also be aware of the dynamic that am I feeling sympathy towards that individual? Because if I am, I'm getting in the place with them where they can actually pull me to a place where I can actually be of help. Empathy is actually continuing to be there, allowing them to own it. One of the biggest misconceptions that people have within counseling and the ministry is the idea that they want to take things away from people. I see it within sessions where I'm mentoring counselors. Did this when I was in ministry, and as a result of that, I'll actually see them emotionally and or physically try to reach over and grab something, and I'll just kind of slap their hand. Not really slap their hand, but you get what I mean. And what they'll do is kind of like, what are you doing? I'm actually trying to do something of being a benefit. And I'm like, no, you're not. You're actually causing them greater impact as a result of what you think you're doing as a benefit is actually going to cause them greater friction as a result. They might get monumental relief, but long term, it's going to impact them significantly. Why? Because if they're not owning whatever it is, then as a result of that, they can't actually allow the opportunity of transacting it for beauty for ashes. It's going to impact them greater. So the opportunity of sympathy is actually taking that empathy as being aware of that and helping walk alongside that while helping them own that by processing it. We see God do this within Cain. The idea of him never actually taking away from what Cain was actually feeling, but actually helping Cain actually own where he was. Why? So he could own it and invite God into it. And if he would have, the story of Cain would have been dramatically different. Would have been dramatically different, but because Cain and the decisions that he made didn't move forward accordingly, we see the impact that took place. So empathy is vital. It's crucial to the point that as a result of that, we see Jesus saying, I only do what I see the Father do. That's attuning to the frequency of heaven, attuning to who God is, and not allowing the people that come into of us distuning to who God is and attuning to them. It's allowing us to stay connected to God as we allow what's in us to be poured out through us. And as a result of that, the times where we feel that we've taken something in that we've received. I remember ministering many, many years ago to a young boy, And I think I responded to this in someone's Blackboard discussion, and I remember him asking me a question. Boy, I can almost, if I close my eyes, I can almost picture myself being in that ministry room, ministering to this little boy and his caregiver sitting right next to him. And he asked me a question that, man, did it impact me. And I held on to that for weeks. Had people praying for me, went to my mentor, chiropractor, counselor, all these different professionals as a result of that, and finally was able to process it. But because of the impact, man, it messed with me. I felt it in that moment. I felt it. So the dynamic of being sympathetic, the idea of trying to take something from them because of seeing the state of pain that they're in, can seem ministerially, can seem sensitive, but as a result of that, it impacts them. Why? Because we can't allow them to process that and transact that onto who God is by assimilating Him in the process if we actually take whatever it is that they're experiencing. Part of this is the idea of using your imagination. I'm trying to think of how the scripture goes, more than we can even begin and or imagine. The imagination is crucial. It deals with kind of the right brain S type quadrant. And so as we think about the dynamic of the imagination, so much about what we do in counseling plays within the role of the imagination. If we think back to Pearls and his empty chair technique, this is something that I utilize a ton as well. So because so many times people are looking for resolve because of the hurt that they're experiencing, what I'll do is I'll grab a chair and I'll pull it across and I'll be like, hey, the very thing that you'd want to tell Dad, picture that Dad's sitting right there. What would you tell him? Knowing that God's here, God, pulling up a chair, God's sitting right there. What would you need to tell him? Walking them through that process. Then I'll actually, if I'm talking about Dad, what would you need to hear from Dad? What would you need to hear from God? And so utilizing the imagination can be vital within the process of counseling. And again, going back to empathy, we want to practice empathy everywhere. We want to be able to do that. Why? Because the idea, if we're not being empathetic, does that mean that we can actually fall in sympathy much easier? And again, I'm going to allow you to come up to that answer. Because again, when we look at Jesus and the ministry of Jesus, we see the dynamics that he would see them, and because of that, then something amazing would happen. He would see them, move with compassion, and then typically a miracle would happen, right? So part of the reason why assignment 1 that we're actually doing that this week is the idea of practicing seeing. Not looking, but seeing. There's a difference. The world that we live in is hungry to be seen. Well, Brady, we look at people all the time. Again, oh, Brady, we're word playing here between the difference between looking and seeing, and we can have that conversation if that's where we want, but the dynamic is so much about validating, and again, this is one of the most crucial things that I teach people is how to validate internally. The idea if the body feels validated with the mind, so the two become in unison, and that there's not a house divided. So that the opportunity of integration between body and soul, so that the spirit of who God is can be invited into whatever is experienced, and now 3 in 1 so that we can actually move forward. Part of the dynamic is when invalidation actually happens, then as a result of that, what happens is we attach a part of who we are in that very moment, and we continue to move forward in the evolution of time. Because of that, we aren't aware of all the deposits of the very things that we've left in the past, but yet we feel it because of all these things trying to pull us back. Because again, we understand the kingdom of darkness is not wanting us to move forward in advancing the gospel. So you can see how validation and or invalidation is crucial in the dynamic of helping people move forward and addressing the things that are impacting them by holding them back. So the idea of sympathy, we see that Jesus was moved with compassion and empathize. He wouldn't actually take it. We see this within the rich young ruler. What must I do to have eternal life? Sell all you have and follow me. Again, because riches were bad? No, because that was what was in the very place of where God wanted. Sympathy would have been him trying to figure out some type of formation and taking that from him. But in empathy, Jesus allowed him to walk away. We want to practice effective listening. effective listening, one of the dynamics of effective listening is active listening. The dynamic of, okay, here's what I heard you say, right? So much about nonverbals is being able to call out, hey, are you mad right now? No, 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 I'm just cold. Okay, great, great. Just want to, and how do we assess those nonverbals just as we did within the Blackboard discussions and trying to figure out if and when and how those times to be able to communicate it are appropriate. But again, active listening to be able to share. This is something, again, that I do in marriage counseling is allowing the idea of what was heard to be able to be responded to so that they're on the same page. Why? Because if we miss it, we can actually be going in a direction that the other person's sitting there thinking, wait a second, what are we talking about? And again, I shared within week one how I missed that. I think in week one, or maybe it was in another class, how I missed that within a session one time where an individual and I were talking. He made a statement. I took that in one way, and I started driving the session in a different direction. About 10 minutes later, he finally asked, wait, are you assuming that this is what we mean? Because that's not what I'm referring to. And as a result of that, I wasted time. I caused him frustrations and conflict because as a result of that, I didn't practice active listening. So active listening as well as effective listening. It's considered a solar skill when we think about face squarely, the dynamic of being able to be in front of them and within appropriate spacing, right? If we're too close, what does that communicate? If we're too far, what does that communicate? And so here's kind of the controversial dynamic. Is there anything in between you and that individual? Some individuals say absolutely not. Do not have a table. Don't have your desk if it's in between them because it's considered a barrier. Don't have a coffee table in between them if it's a barrier, right? So the idea of how you face, if we can face up squarely, but is that coffee table, is that desk a boundary? Well, again, we talked a little bit at week one about how I have resolved that within myself by the coffee table that's in my office and how it's a lot lower to the point where it can be seen as a barrier if that gives them safety, but the idea of it's not so high. Well, you can be saying, Brady, how do you constitute that not being a barrier? Well, again, I want them to be able to have some space, a safe space, because if I'm meeting with a woman by myself, how do I give her that safe space to the extent of any thoughts that she may be going through her head that can be resolved by allowing that space and a physical boundary such as a coffee table? Again, how do you resolve that? Okay, face squarely, open posture, leaning forward. This is what's interesting. There are so many times within sessions that the idea of constantly leaning forward is that appropriate, right? You want to be able to utilize this just as a dance. If there are motions to a dance, and if I'm constantly only doing one thing, am I doing the dance properly, right? So in that, is there an appropriate time where leaning back in your chair is actually okay? Now, if you're doing something to the point where it's causing distraction, okay, that's something else. There are times within some of the clients that I interact with, based upon getting to know them, based upon building that rapport, that the idea of continue to lean forward could cause them a little anxiety. So as a result of that, leaning back a little bit could be beneficial. But the idea, if I lean back too much, does that communicate and convey that I don't care or that it's too relaxed? So the idea of leaning forward, absolutely, but how much and when? Eye contact. We want to be able to communicate eye contact. Why? So that they have the opportunity of knowing that they're being seen. Just as we talked about within Jesus, he saw them, was moved with compassion, and something amazing would take place. And as a result of that, how much eye contact? Well, if I'm constantly looking away, and as a result of that, yep. And here's the thing: it may convey that I'm not listening, and I could have heard everything that individual had said. But it's not only about whether or not I'm getting it, but what kind of message I'm conveying to the individual sitting across from me. And then Brady, I won $1 billion, I went scuba diving. Wait, you won $1 million? Oh, you're listening. Oh, yeah. Oh, I thought because you were looking out the window that you weren't. See, what we do with our nonverbals matter, right? And so in that, eye contact is important. But is too much eye contact, does that cause anxiety? You know, we live in a culture that the idea of constant eye contact where you don't look away ever so often can actually be to the extent of being communicating as staring, right? The idea of ever so often that the communicator, that's kind of a rule that you can go off of. Who, if I'm being communicated to, okay, listen, okay. But if I'm communicating ever so often and look back, one of the things that I do, I think I've shared this next to my couch where they can't see, is I have a clock. And so that's a way that I can kind of gauge where I am in the session to determine kind of from a scuba diver standpoint. Never been scuba diving, think it'd be awesome. But what I've learned is the idea of, that you go down to the depth that you want to go, but that you've got to allow yourself plenty of time to get up, because again, if there's 2 minutes and we're sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, time's up, we got to get going. But the idea of how do we allow that individual to surface in an appropriate manner that doesn't cause them harm, because if you're scuba diving from what I've been told, and you surface too quick, that can cause issues. So the idea of eye contact, timing, all these different things, it's dance. And then we want to be relaxed. Be yourself. I don't have to have all the answers. Misconception. Here's the thing. I don't have a lot of answers. And there will be times in my sessions that I'll be sitting there and I'll be like, you may wonder what I'm doing over here, but I'm just quiet for a moment and I'm just trying to figure out or trying to anticipate where we need to go next. If they're a believer, then I'll say, I'm just talking to God about trying to determine next best steps. We think that it's constant. We have to continue to keep this thing at a flow and a momentum that if we don't, that communicate. And it can. But I want to be overt, and I want to be open with the individuals where I am, so that if I am silent, it's not because they anticipate that I'm judging and trying to process what they just told me. Oh my goodness, he doesn't know what to do because of what I just communicated, and he's been doing this for a long time. What I'm experiencing is that bad. If we don't create concreteness, right, like we just talked about with Rogers, then as a result of that, the area of hypotheticals can actually be can create an invitation. The enemy loves the realm of hypotheticals. So with that, we want to exasperate any opportunity that hypotheticals are introduced into the sessions by creating concreteness. We want to communicate that we are listening, and so in that, let's see what else we got. Table 3.1 on our book, reinstate the simple, least effective, the reflection of content emotion at best. So here's what I always communicate. Address emotion first, logic second. Address emotion first, logic second. And just as Jesus would always say, fear not emotion, for I am with you, logic. And so many people that are cerebral, that are very logical, that are very spatial, those type of things, that they always want to go logic first. And allow them to go emotion first, then logic can actually help out significantly. We want to be able to utilize questions, right? Especially in that first couple of sessions, so that we're getting an understanding of what this puzzle that they're experiencing is. And that's what I'll even say, part of this is us trying to figure out where the light switch is in a dark room. So we may actually run into the wall a couple times, but me leading, I'll be the one that actually runs into the wall. So, or I'll use the illustration of, what we're doing is we're trying to figure out this as a puzzle. And when you think about a puzzle, you dump it all on the floor and then you turn all the puzzle pieces over. And then for me, I like to work along the edges first and then fill in the gaps. And so in this, as I ask questions, you may be trying to figure out the pertinency of the questions, or you may anticipate that I'm asking too many questions. And so in that, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create the foundations of what's taking place so that we can actually utilize the content you're telling me to figure out what's taking place so I can help you best. So try to figure out some ways to communicate that. And if you can see that a lot of the questions that you're asking, because of their responses, are very open-ended, but they're taking the open-ended questions and they're making them very closed-ended, how do you restructure that? How do you restructure that? And then how do you make them aware? What's amazing is a lot of the questions I'm asking, I'm not getting enough of the responses to help me build this picture to be able to help you, right? And so in that, if you could unpack that a little bit more, right? Try to figure out a different way to ask questions so it doesn't seem like it's 100 questions. The opportunity of asking questions can be vital and can be crucial, but depending on how we do it can feel like 100 questions and or not. We want to use questions, but we don't want to seem like it is they're on the hot seat where we're playing 100 questions. We want to use reflection statements to deepen the relationship and let them know that we're hearing them. So what I heard in that active listening, like we were talking about last time, what I'm hearing is this. Did I hear that right? Yes. Okay, great. So it shows. Guess what? I'm listening, and from that I can even add. So in that, could the possibility of being of that be this? Now again, I never want to add my part to create concreteness until I've had an opportunity of asking a question to help them fill in that gap. But if I've tried filling in that gap by asking a question, but tried filling in the gap by asking a question time and time again, then what can take place is it seems like is then that's when I'll actually step forward. We want to talk about the language of feelings. We want that like we were talking about the dynamic earlier is that we want to help them understand the part of the body mind connection and experience. And again, if they're not a believer, okay, then the dynamic of the spiritual, how do you assess that and what part does it play? But really what I want to help them understand is how our bodies feel. How our bodies feel, and the kind of thing that we can do is actually validate that. We want to help them identify and name feelings. You may say, "Well, Brady, if I'm counseling and or ministering adults, shouldn't they know feelings?" Well, I've had people in the past where everything that they knew within a feeling and how to communicate it was one word, whether it was frustrating. And what was frustrating to their spouse was that they couldn't dissect that. So frustrating could be, man, I forgot to, goodness, I'm trying to think of a less intense scenario. I forgot to take out the trash before leaving. Okay, like, or I'm frustrated that I can never win with you. Right? We see the different variances of that frustration, and because of how this individual assessed feelings, he had one terminology for all of that, and as a result of that, it was causing him tremendous friction because he wasn't able to communicate how he felt to his wife, and because of that, that caused her frustrations. We want to help them identify it and name it. And so sometimes we'll pull out sheets and things of that nature and the feeling wheel and help them assess that. And a lot of times if I'm working with the marriage, then I'll say, you know what, you've been given a gift of your spouse and the gifting of how they have been able to be aware of feelings and the language behind that. So in that, help allow them to be assimilated in the process. And again, we can use the internet, we can use posters, we can for kids, we can use games. But one of the things we want to do is we want to normalize feelings. Why? Because we are in a generation, the dynamic that we see so much about the connection between the physical and emotional. I saw a commercial, I can't remember when it was, about a year ago, maybe it was a little bit longer than that, and it was about an insurance company talking about doctors and all these different things, and they were actually assessing that if you're feeling something like this, to this extent, then go see your medical doctor. And I was like, yes. Why? Because the idea of we're starting to allow we're starting to assess the variance of feelings and how it can impact our physical health. So we want to help people normalize feelings. Why? Because we feel. We feel before we think, just as the neurology and the way that we were created and grafted. So as a result of that, we want to be able to assess that and be able to impact that. Okay. We want to use your word. You want to use your words and reflections, right? Instead of just, okay, I've got that and continue to move on. As a result of that, reflect. Reflect. Why? Because if I'm reflecting, and as a result of that, knowing how I receive something, it could be different in the manner that they meant to give it. Oh, no, Brady, that's not really what I meant. Oh, okay. Well, so what did you mean when you said this? Oh, this is what I mean. Oh, okay. So they may tell you something, In the process, you're reflecting, and they can say, "Yep, that's exactly right," um, and or no, that's not. Suggest possible feelings for scenarios. So if they're telling you about a scenario, and you ask, okay, so how'd that impact you? What were you feeling? What were you thinking? And as a result of that, I don't know. I always tell them that I don't know may not work as an answer outside these walls, but inside these walls, guess what? I don't know is appropriate response. It's a great response. Why? Because it puts us at the starting line for us to continue to learn so that we can move forward, which is great. So in that, I could say, I know that other individuals who have gone through a certain scenario, these are some of the feelings that they've communicated to me. I know that if I went through a personal scenario, again about self-reflecting, and self-disclosing, be aware how much, how little. Don't make it to the point where it's all about you, but you can utilize this to be able to be helpful. If I was going through that situation, man, I would be angry. If I went through that situation, I would be beyond frustrated. I would be beyond frustrated. So in that, be able to share within possible different scenarios. Uh, Always be within consideration of gender, how you're utilizing different dynamics in building up the counseling skills within the counseling the gender that you're interacting with. Again, like I was talking about the women that come into my sessions, I want to create some type of barrier where it doesn't become so obtruse to the point where nothing is being communicated, but to the point where it creates safety and security. And also culturally, I know that I had a counselor one time that he was a great counselor, but he wasn't aware of the cultural dynamics of this individual, and he decided to lean back and cross his feet on the table. Well, showing the sole of the foot to the individual culturally was insensitive, so this man ran out the office. And so, in that, do we have to know everything? But no, just like I talked about last week, be aware of where their attention is. Oh, is having my feet. Probably shouldn't have your feet on the table to begin with. Again, counselors can get lax the longer they do this, and so as a result of that, this is why it's good for us to assess this so that we can see that we're not regressing. Early on, we follow this to a T, but the longer that we teach this, the more and participate within the field, the more lax that counselors. It's not that they do, but they can, and so as a result of that, probably a good working definition is from a standpoint. Don't throw your feet up on your furniture if the other individual is sitting across from you. Uh, a little bit of content about the emotionally reluctant client. The individuals who may come in your office and they sit and they've got their arms closed off, and they're not going to do anything. They're unwilling to admit fear. They're taught to not to show emotion. They're deeply wounded, possibly traumatized. They may not talk about emotions. Might not be in touch. Fear of loss of control of emotions. They may be seen as weakness. Develops rigidity and or hardness. Loss of emotion, including positive ones. Isolation from self and others. So in that, if you ever find yourself trying to build this connection with a client such as, and again, the longer you do it, the more that you'll run into these individuals. You want to provide a safe and welcoming environment. And of course, you want to do that with anybody, especially across the board, but as a result of that, especially with these, you want to use feeling and reflections to teach language of feelings. The dynamic of this so that it can break down any variables and or walls about how they assess, and to the extent of allowing them, if they have subconscious beliefs, which they would, then as a result of that, how that they become aware of these so that they can actually start shifting and changing. We want to use techniques, but mostly through the relationship. The relationship is going to be vital in interacting with them. Okay, we want to use direct discussions for their beliefs about their feelings. The dynamic of what we understand is, again, you're going to hear me say this time and time again, 95% of what we believe we do. And so in that, what is it that they experienced or they observed that got imprinted into their subconscious that as a result of that has them unpacking that in a way that's impacting them? Okay, so we want to have direct discussions about their beliefs, about their feelings. We want to validate them by thanking them. You know what? Thank you so much for trusting me and coming in here and being vulnerable. I know that that could be difficult, but wow, that is a strength. It speaks to that dynamic of how they may assess weakness. That is a strength. We want to commit to the gentleness of utilizing their heart. Thank you so much. We want to be aware of our own emotions, like we talked about earlier, about the dynamics of what's in us permeates through us. We want to prioritize you and your own emotional world. Make sure that at the end of the day, you give yourself a little time to process and make sure that the sessions that you had, that they don't go home with you. I know that that was one of the dynamics within the first week of discussion boards that we were that people were kept students y'all kept saying, this is an area that I need to grow in, and it makes perfect sense. I know I had people that would say, hey, Brady, I speak in tongues going out. Now again, you may say, Brady, that's an area that I don't believe in. Okay, perfectly fine. It may be saying a prayer over yourself. It may be taking the long way home. It may be going to the lake or whatever it may be. But what's something that you can do to process your emotions? What Jesus did when he felt impacted, when we see this story about John the Baptist, when he heard about that, guess what? He went to a place of solitude to get alone with the Father. Why? Well, the Bible doesn't actually say what type of processing what took place outside of the dynamic of what the Garden of Eden, or I'm sorry, the Garden of Gethsemane looked like, that he invited God into the equation in times of difficulty so that he was able to move forward. Prioritize your own emotional world. Know thyself, just as Jesus and Aristotle would say, know thyself. Be able to be aware of how your body speaks. Just as that time that little boy communicated a question, I felt it. I didn't know at that time that would stick with me because of not understanding the body and the biology and all those different things. But as a result of that, know yourself. Balance of expression and emotion. The dynamic of how do you express yourself from the standpoint of emotion and how they correlate to the extent. On a given day, utilize a Likert scale from a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best. How are you doing today? Brady, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the worst, how am I doing? Evaluate yourself. And again, if these are benefits to be able to utilize with the people across from you, whether that's ministerially and or clinically, then utilize them in a way that that can be beneficial to you. And lastly, process emotions with your supervisor, with whomever your upline is, with a counselor and or a good friend or pastor, or whoever that looks like. Why? Because emotions are impacting. They can impact us positively and or negatively depending on how we are aware of them and how we express them. We see as a result, Cain expressed his emotions finally after they were repressed. But in that the moment that he was triggered by seeing Abel, then what did he do? He expressed them, but they were in a way that caused him, his mom and dad, Abel, and everybody that associated around him, it caused him pain. So as a result of that, knowing what's in us can permeate through us, what's in us can eventually surface, what's in us can be expressed through us, can impact us significantly. Then the idea of making sure that we're processing that spiritually with God, inviting him in, but also with the people around us that love us, that care about us, and making sure that, guess what, that we don't express that in an illegitimate way that's going to get us in trouble. So that is chapter 3. I hope you have a great week too. Can't wait to read your assignment 1 papers. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll make sure that there are more dynamics of what I'm looking for within the assignment and the paper. Make sure you read not only chapter 3 as I walk through it from this lecture, but also read chapter 4 and have yourself a great week too, and look forward to continuing the journey with you. Have a great week. Bye-bye.